Captain Moroni, a fearless military leader, a champion of liberty, a man willing to fight for freedom at any cost. But what if his story isn't as ancient as we think? What if the dramatic conflict between the freemen and the kingmen in Alma 51 was actually inspired by the American Revolution? Tonight, we uncover striking parallels between Captain Moroni, George Washington, and the Revolutionary War, drawing on connections that just might change the way you see the Book of Mormon. Let's dive in. This is Mormonism Live. Good morning, or good evening, Radio Free Mormon. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good.
I'm fine, just thank you. I know we're in a different time zone. I didn't know it was that different.
Not that different. Folks, welcome to tonight's episode. It is January 29th, 2025. Before we jump into it, any thoughts from you or anything going on in your world that you want to share with the audience tonight?
Just that the title of the show is Captain Moroni, the Nephite George Washington, Mormonism Live, number 216. And I know you'll be manning the helm tonight, Mr. Real. I wore my Captain America t-shirt, especially for the occasion. And I just wanted to say, Radio Free Mormon, reporting for duty, sir.
Nice. Excellent. So let's jump into it, folks. We've got a lot for you tonight. It's going to be maybe a long show. I'm hoping that we can sort of zip through some of this. I will also just note that Professor Thomas Murphy is watching along. He has some scholarship that he made us aware of maybe about halfway through the week. And we have incorporated some of that into the slideshow as well. And so with that, let's jump in. And then RFM, if I can ask you to also help me sort of man the comments to put things up on the screen. If folks are, as always, are making great comments, we'll put your comments up on the screen for the show. And so with that, let's jump into it. The first thing I just want to say, the thumbnail I thought was kind of cool. We put Captain Moroni, George Washington. You've got the translation hat in the stone. And then you've got the title of liberty on the left, the American 13 colony flag on the right, Captain Moroni, the Nephite George Washington. And so I put a couple of pictures up just showing the Revolutionary War, an image of that being depicted. And then we've got a image of Lamanites and Nephites, or maybe in this instance, Nephites and Nephites battling. We'll get to that here shortly. But I wanted to jump in. And so we're going to share a bunch of verses of the Book of Mormon tonight. And what we're hoping to make a case for, you can determine the strength of that case. But what we're hoping to make a case for is that of all the places that Joseph Smith directly borrowed from, and RFM covered that a few weeks ago on how Joseph Smith created Mormonism. And in that episode, there was a great conversation about various things that Terrell Gibbons had pointed to, that we showed that Terrell was pointing to Joseph grabbing a lot of things out of his milieu. And then you had a conversation with Ganesh a few weeks ago where he mentioned something with George Washington or the Revolutionary War. I can't remember what it was, but it struck me. And as you guys were chatting, I went looking, and within 10 minutes, I was like, wow, there's enough here for an episode. And then Professor Murphy even added to that. So Alma chapter 51, verse 1.
Hey, Bill, can I just break in here and say,
please,
that it was the funniest thing I've ever seen is that Bill was so taken with this idea that he got so excited about it. He actually started researching it while we were still doing the show.
Yeah, and whether that's rude or not, sometimes you have to get a few of your thoughts down so you know to come back to it and you know what it is that you're going to find.
I like the passion that it shows.
When I find something I didn't know and I think it has enough depth to be a podcast episode and to help our audience gain more information, I am tickled pink in those moments. I really get excited. So Alma 51, verse 1. And now it can, and by the way, RFM, I'll let you after this one. I'll take this one, but then after that, I'll ask you to read maybe 2 out of 3 of these so that I can get you involved. I know towards the end of the show, you've got some stuff on Richard Bushman, which I think is really interesting. And you've been threatening to leave it at the cutting room floor, and I'm going to press you not to do that. So we'll move quickly and make sure that makes the show as well. And now it came to pass in the commencement of the 25th year of the reign of judges over the people of Nephi, they having established peace between the people of Lehi and the people of Morianton concerning their lands, and having commenced the 25th year in peace. So they'd had wars, and now there's a break. There's a moment of peace. And I just want to note that America has a very similar thing happening. There is the 7 Years' War, which is what it was known across the world, the globe. But here in America, we called it the French and Indian War. It ran from 1754 to 1763. And it, if folks can sort of put their heads back, again, it's hard to do because Stephen Harper said the past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. But the formerly, United States of America wasn't the United States of America. It was some colonies of the British on the coast, on the East Coast. You had Spain having claims on certain parts of land. You had the French having certain claims of land. And we'll see a map here. It might be the next slide, but it's somewhere here shortly. That sort of shows what the country looked like prior to that. They end up having the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War, and that sort of sorts out, at least for a moment, how these lands are going to be divided up. And the British begin to take some additional power and influence in North America. And so there's that. Treaty of Paris was what culminated the 7 Years' War. And then you end up with a moment of peace. And so just to start relating things from the Book of Mormon, and by the way, I think some of these connections may seem weak to you. I think by the end of this episode, there will be enough stuff here that will be convincing. And then I think the magnitude of all of it added together adds some weight as well. Anything you want to say there, RFM? Otherwise, I'll just keep moving along.
No, okay. You're doing great.
All right. So Alma 51, verses 2 and 3. Nevertheless, they did not. Okay, let me let you read this one. I'm so sorry, RFM.
No problem. I'm occupied, believe me, monitoring the live chat.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, they did not long maintain an entire peace in the land, for there began to be a contention among the people concerning the chief judge, Pahoran. For behold, there were a part of the people who desired that a few particular points of the law should be altered. But behold, Pahoran would not alter, nor suffer the law to be altered. Therefore, he did not hearken to those who had sent in their voices with their petitions concerning the altering of the law. There's a lot of altering in there.
Yeah. So, okay. So there's this idea that the points of the law should be changed. And when we go back to what were the major causes of the American Revolution, you can go look everywhere. But Wikipedia, this is the editors of Encyclopedia Britannica. The American Revolution was principally caused by colonial opposition to British attempts to impose greater control over the colonies and make them repay the crown for its defense of them during the French and Indian War. And we'll get into a lot more instances where the colonists trying to secure protection, both in where they're at, as well as securing protection if they move westward, becomes a big deal. And so to make them repay the crown for its defense of them during the French and Indian War, Britain did this primarily by imposing a series of deeply unpopular laws and taxes, including the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, and the so-called Intolerable Acts. These were all laws meant to tax the colonist. And this just like the Book of Mormon verses we just read, the colonists are they're fighting like hell to get these repealed. And they're frustrated with them, and they want the laws changed. Go ahead and read this one too, RFM, Alma 51, verse 4.
Therefore, those who were desirous that the law should be altered, sorry, that's like 4 altars. Therefore, those who were desirous that the law should be altered were angry with him and desired that he should no longer be chief judge over the land. Therefore, there arose a warm dispute concerning the matter, but not unto bloodshed.
So in the beginning, there isn't any bloodshed. Well, the Boston Tea Party stands out as a significant event. And one of the interesting things about the Boston Tea Party, while it was mayhem for sure, was that the colonists, the patriots, went out of their way to make sure that this was peaceful. So it says here the Sons of Liberty, a radical group, decided to confront the British head on. Thinly disguised as Mohawks, they boarded 3 ships in Boston Harbor and destroyed more than 92,000 pounds of British tea by dumping it into the harbor to make the point that they were rebels rather than vandals. They avoided harming any of the crew or damaging the ships themselves, and even the next day replaced a padlock that had been broken. So this was a peaceful attempt, although they were destroying property, the tea. It was a peaceful attempt to make a point and get Britain to change. Anything you want to say here, RFM?
No. I don't need to belabor the point about this in order to make the point you're going to make with it.
Yeah. So Alma 51, verse 5. And here's where I think, at least for a moment, this starts to get sort of interesting.
And by the way, these are all just in order, aren't they? All these verses.
Yeah, what I'm positing here is that Joseph Smith seems to be following a pattern that was established in the events, happenings, and characters of what led up to and carried out through the American Revolution.
This is right at the beginning of the war chapters too. And it came to pass that those who were desirous that Pahoran should be dethroned from the judgment seat were called kingmen, for they were desirous that the laws should be altered in a manner to overthrow the free government and to establish a king over the land.
Yeah, the Book of Mormon calls the people kingmen. And it's sort of strange because that's exactly what the British citizens in the Americas were called. So as people sort of pick sides, you had some people picking the side of the Patriots. You had some people picking the side of Britain. And even Wikipedia notes that so I'll just read this, the Loyalists were colonists in the 13 colonies who remained loyal to the British Crown during the American Revolutionary War, often referred to as Tories. Royalist or Kingsmen at the time. They were opposed by the Patriots or Whigs who supported the revolution and considered them persons inimical to the liberties of America. And I just want to note, it would have been common for the loyalists to Britain to be called kingmen. That's what they were called. But then it gets bigger than that. RFM 51, verse 6.
And those who were desirous that Pahoran should remain chief judge over the land took upon them the name of freemen. And thus was the division among them, for the freemen had sworn or covenanted to maintain their rights and the privileges of their religion by a free government.
Now, that would be strange if we also found that the colonists who were patriots went by the name freemen, wouldn't we? But that's exactly what we find. Freemen, 13 colonies, was during the American colonial period. A freeman was a person who was not a slave. The term originated in 12th century Europe, but it was used prominently. Wikipedia has a special section for freemen among the 13 colonies. That would have been a common term. And the thing that's important to remember is that Joseph Smith is not coming that far after the American Revolution. Revolution starts, sort of leading up to 1760s, the announcement of a formal sort of Declaration of Independence and all of that stuff, 1776. The war happens over the course of several years. And Joseph Smith then organizes the LDS Church in 1830, and he's writing the Book of Mormon in the mid to late 1820s. And so we're talking about, 50 years removed. It's not a significant amount of time. Whatever happened in the Revolutionary War, those stories would have been told by all of the older citizens as they sat around the table, as they shot the breeze with each other, as they sat in a tavern and had a conversation. These would have been the stories that were told. He would have grown up in the thick of it.
And you've
Okay.
mentioned the War of 1812, haven't you?
I haven't, but please.
Oh, well, that was like, part 2.
Yeah.
So that was much more recent even than the Revolutionary War.
Yeah. So we already get this freemen and kingmen term that is used common to the day. And it just so happens that Lamanites and Nephites from a completely different place in time and a completely different geographic journey, and also using a completely different language, Reformed Egyptian, end up using the same exact terms that are starting to match up very well with the American Revolution. RFM Alma 51, verse 7.
You want me to read this like Morgan Freeman?
Yeah, you can read it like Morgan Freeman. Where my
That sounds
favorite.
a lot like Humphrey Bogart. I'll just read it like me. And it came to pass that this matter of their contention, the freeman was the gag. And it came to pass that this matter of their contention was settled by the voice of the people, because this is how people did shit. I'm sorry. This is how people did stuff over 2,000 years ago, right? It's not like democracies are the rule. Not everybody's into democracies. In fact, I would guess that it's a distinct minority that even try them on for size. So it's just interesting that what it's talking about is exactly what an American would talk about, especially that soon after the Revolutionary War, and sticking it to Fat George in England. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I not finish this? And it came to pass that this matter of their contention was settled by the voice of the people. And it came to pass another one. And it came to pass that the voice of the people. This is why the Book of Mormon is over 500 pages long, folks. It just said the same damn thing twice in a row. Okay, and it came to pass that the voice of the people came in favor of the freemen. Yay! And Pehoran retained the judgment seat, which caused much rejoicing among the brethren of Pehoran, and also many of the people of liberty, but also put the kingmen to silence, that they durst not oppose, but were obliged to maintain. Is that the cause of freedom? Yes.
And so here, I just want to note that the freemen seem to outnumber the kingmen. And what we find is that that's the exact same thing leading up to the American Revolution.
I think the election was rigged, Bill, if you want my honest opinion.
It may be, but patriots included a cross-section of the population of the 13 colonies and came from varying backgrounds. Roughly 40 to 45% of the white population is believed to have supported the Patriots' cause. Between 15 to 20% supported the Loyalist. So 40 to 45% for the freemen, 15 to 20% for the kingmen, and the remainder were neutral or kept a low profile regarding their loyalties. The great majority of Loyalists remained in the 13 colonies during the American Revolution. A minority, however, fled the nation for Canada, Great Britain, Florida, and the West Indies. And then I'll just note here, verses 9 through 12, because I don't want to read them. I'll just give a little synopsis. Amalickiah, having incited the Lamanites against the Nephites, diligently prepared for war, vowing to kill Moroni. Though his forces were reduced due to prior defeats, he still assembled a large army and confidently marched towards Zarahemla in the 25th year of the judges, coinciding with the internal Nephite dispute over the chief judge Pehoran. And I'll just say, the number of folks who were loyal to Britain diminished from the time of the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, to the time that the American Revolution starts. The patriots, little by little, got more of the collective people around them to be in favor of them. And so it sort of goes along with that scripture as well. So I'll just note that. Alma 51:13.
This is all the same chapter.
This is it. We're going to stay mostly here for a minute.
Wow.
before we go off to other things.
I
But this,
mean, I'm keep remarking on this because I'm underscoring the fact you're not jumping all around and just
no,
cherry picking from different
no,
places.
mm-mm.
Okay.
Nope, it's in order and all close together.
Okay, so 51:13, and it came to pass that when the men who were called kingmen had heard that the Lamanites were coming down to battle against them, they were glad in their hearts, and they refused to take up arms, for they were so wroth with the chief judge and also with the people of liberty that they would not take up arms to defend their country.
Yeah. And I just want to note here the way, if you believe that Joseph is borrowing from the American Revolution, it would seem as though he's portraying the Lamanites using as a backdrop for that the British Army, and that the freemen are the colonists on the patriot side, and the kingmen are the colonists on the loyalist side. And when you see it from that perspective, and by the way, yes, Dr. Murphy, I'm going to make sure that we include that because I thought that was a great point that you make about Sir William Johnson. So we will put that in. Um, Joseph is pointing out how the kingmen don't want to fight, that they're going to put down their arms. They're not going to defend their country. But they're the people who are living here in the geographic area that we're talking about here in the Book of Mormon. And it is, as you pointed out, RFM, it is interesting that this all sort of follows within the same chapter. And even when we move around a bit, we're not going to go far. We'll be in Alma 46 or Alma 48, Alma 43. This stuff is all close together, and it all follows the same narrative of the American Revolution. All right, so here's the map. I just want to note there are lots of other folks with allegiances to other countries that are in North America. The colonists start off sort of in these 13 colonies, but they would like to start land grabbing further to the west. Because Britain had defended the colonists during the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, when that war was over, and we already sort of covered it, when that war was over, Britain needed to get some money back. It needed to get some capital back, and it can't just keep protecting the colonist at its own expense. But really, that's what the colonists felt like they owed it. Like, you sent us here to take up this land. And so Britain would often tell the colonists they needed to come up with their own army. But they also would tax the colonists heavily so that they could pay for some of the defense to protect them. And the colonists saw it as Britain's job to take care of that without overtaxing them, that they had placed them across the ocean on this on North America and felt like Britain owed them something for that. And so you can see how both sides sort of pointed the finger at the other, and it caused a lot of distrust and a lot of rebelliousness from both sides towards the other in terms of the British trying to punish in one way or another the colonists, and the colonists trying to gain additional freedom. And then I'll just note the proclamation of 1763 prohibited settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains, a region that was costly for the British to protect. So what eventually happened in the proclamation of 1763 is Britain made it illegal for the colonists to go any further west because they didn't have the ability to protect them. And so it was like, for your own good, children, we're going to keep you from being able to claim lands further out. But the trouble was, some of the colonists had already paid for those lands. They owned them, and now they were being told by Britain that they couldn't go and claim them. And so that also caused for some frustration 13 years before the American Revolution started. Okay, Library of Congress, British Reforms, Colonial Resistance, 1763. This quote, this paragraph came from the Library of Congress. You can look it up by typing that top right thing in, British Reforms and Colonial Resistance, 1763 to 1766. I just want to note there the underlined section. From the British point of view, it was only right that American colonists should pay their fair share of the cost for their own defense. So now when you look back at the Book of Mormon and you get the freemen who are wanting to take up arms against the Lamanites or British Army, and you've got the loyalists who don't want to get involved, and now you start to get some of the context of what was going on leading up to the American Revolution. I'll also just note here taxation and legislation. The huge debt incurred by the 7 Years' War and demands from the British taxpayers for cuts in government expenditure meant Parliament expected colonies to fund their own defense. So just what I just said. The Sugar Act and Stamp Act, which imposed additional taxes on the colonies to pay for defending the western frontier. The taxes proved highly burdensome, particularly for the poorer classes, and quickly became a source of discontent. It really was the poor people who felt the brunt of what Britain was trying to do. And I just want to note, we didn't go into it tonight, but there are verses in this chapter 51 of Alma that speak of the kingmen being the wealthier among the group, the more wealthy people among the Nephites. And so there is that as well. Okay. Alma 51, 15 through, I think, 17. I thought it was 18, but 15 through 8 or 17. Would you read this, RFM?
Sure. And it came to pass that he sent a petition with the voice of the people unto the governor of the land, desiring that he should read it and give him, Moroni, power to compel those dissenters, those kingmen, right, to defend their country or to put them to death. This was always a favorite passage among the elders in Japan. For it was his first care to put an end to such contentions and dissensions among the people. For behold, this had been hitherto a cause of all their destruction. And it came to pass that it was granted according to the voice of the people. Okay. And it came to pass that Moroni commanded that his army should go against those kingmen to pull down the pride and their nobility and level them with the earth, or they should take up arms and support the cause of liberty.
And if you know anything about the American Revolution, and I learned a lot in the last few weeks, sort of looking things up, but the Patriot, the colonial army, and the politicians that were lining up to be on behalf of the colonists that were on the Patriot side, there was constant efforts to get the neutral folks to make oaths to claim whether they were going to be on Britain's side or on the Patriot side. And so you see here in that very beginning, Moroni can power to compel the dissenters to defend their country or put them to death. Again, the kingmen or the loyalist or the folks claiming to be neutral in the American Revolution, nobody wanted the loyal, I should say that. The patriots who made up 40 to 45% didn't want to tolerate this 15% of folks who were taking England's side. And so there was this constant effort to try to push people to make an oath to the Patriot side. There was lots of frustration that folks were remaining neutral, and there was lots of frustration at what the loyalists were doing behind the scenes to help benefit Britain. And so it goes right in line with what the Book of Mormon is talking about.
Hey, Bill?
Yes.
Jonathan, I'm sorry to break in, but just to give variety, Jonathan Lamouth, the mouth, Jonathan says, that parenthetical Moroni feels so wrong in a passage of scripture. Is that actually in the Book of Mormon, the parenthetical? Did you add that?
What you're seeing on the screen right now is the scriptures as off of LDS.org.
Verse 15, because they make it clear it's Moroni and not Pahoran, I think. Is who they're trying to make it clear. But yeah, it's strange to have that parenthetical. There's got to be a story behind that.
Yeah, I don't know. Other than when Joseph Smith is translating, he doesn't include a proper name, which would allow the reader to understand. And so the church is then, after the fact, adding it in so that people can make sense of the scripture.
Yeah.
The other thing that happens here is what you're seeing in verses 15 through 17 is that Moroni gets governmental power to lead the army. This is where he gets to essentially be in charge. Pahoran gives him authority, and we find the same thing when the Continental Congress commissioned George Washington as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. Before I even had interest in doing this episode, I was reading a book about conspiracy theories to try to, I shouldn't say conspiracy theory, conspiracy attempts to try to assassinate or get George Washington out of the way early on in the war. And the book started off by telling the story about how Washington gained leadership. And it's when when the Patriot folks were getting together early on to begin having discussions about how they wanted to handle all these issues from Britain, everybody came together. John Adams and all those guys, they all get together, and George Washington shows up in his military garb, and he immediately draws everyone's respect. He is a man. There's just no doubt of anybody in the room that he commands authority, that he has confidence in himself. And when they're trying to decide who should lead the military, who should lead the army, they don't spend much time on it. He is the guy. There really isn't any question about who it should be. And George Washington is given authority to be commander-in-chief of the Continental Army on June 19th, 1775 by the Continental Congress. And you can see the Continental Congress document on the right. Washington rides in. As soon as he gets authority, within a short moment, he rides in to take leadership of the troops. And they're a ragtag band of folks, and he immediately implements a lot of that. He had gone out and when he had been called to lead the army, there was a moment in time in between that and him actually doing it. He went out and purchased tons of books on military leadership and different things with spying and other skills that he had not quite either refined or gathered yet. But he took this, uber serious. And George Washington, by all accounts, we all sort of know, is really, if not the main reason, one of the main reasons why we end up coming out victorious is because he's the right man for the job. So anyway, there's that. And then I'll just note here, many ordinary citizens inclined to neutrality were reluctantly forced to choose between two sides by unfolding events. The Patriots' use of non-importation agreements and loyalty oaths in the 1760s and 1770s pushed many neutrals into active opposition. That's exactly what Moroni was talking about in the Book of Mormon, except he threatened death, which in this case was not the thing. But there were moments where kingmen or loyalists or people who were neutral did have their lives threatened or did get some sort of punishment for that stuff.
I think some of them were killed.
Yeah.
It's one thing to placate, if I can call it that, and I don't mean to be rude. It's one thing to placate the Jehovah's Witnesses. And is it Seventh-day? Well, there's anyway, a religion that says, I'm not going to fight in the army, right? And I'll serve in some other thing. It's one thing to placate people like that when you don't have an army or a war going on in your backyard. When you got wars over there, you can do that all day long. When you're right here and these people who are right there in your neighborhood are not fighting alongside of you, then they end up getting classified by many people on this side as belonging to the enemy, which they are, and that's why they're not fighting. So they become the enemy and they get shot sometimes.
And you're either for us or against us, right? Like you're either with us or we can't trust you to be not working for them. So there's that. During the military conflict, the occupation of territory also put pressure on the inhabitants to choose a side, as neutrals tended to be harassed by both sides. All right. Now I want to get into some of the heavier stuff. Coincidence or not, would it surprise you to know that there is a whole host of similarities between George Washington in the American Revolution and Captain Moroni and the tension between the kingmen and freemen? We've gone into some of that, but there was a book written by David Ramsey, and I wanted to find out, this is what I couldn't find. If anybody out there has access to this, I would love it. You did the episode RFM where we covered Terrell Gibbons' pursuit of the books that Joseph Smith had within his library. And I wondered if Freeman from David Ramsey was part of that. Not that all of Joseph Smith's books he ever read were included in the books that he donated that Terrell Gibbons does have a list of, but it would have been sort of a overwhelming piece of evidence if this book was in that library. And there's a couple other books we'll reference as well. The first one is The History of the American Revolution on the left, David Ramsey, and then David Ramsey's other book, Eulogies and I'm not going to say that, Orations Life and Death of General George Washington. And so he was an expert in Joseph Smith's day a little bit before that these books would have been accessible to Joseph Smith.
They
Here's
were published before Joseph Smith,
yes. I don't see if I got the date on these,
or at least before the Book of Mormon.
but if somebody wants to look them up and see what the dates on those are, but before the Book of Mormon.
Okay.
And then these are the similarities, and we'll get to a couple big ones, which I withheld off of here. But spirit of freedom, beginning hostilities, that one doesn't count because they just go into offense. But embarrassments, murmurs, conquer and die, and these I don't think these are overwhelming. I just want to point them out so that we give the full context here of all the things that are considered overlap. Conquer and die. Here's ones that are I think, a little more convincing. The cause of liberty, cause of their country, died in the cause of liberty, rights and privileges, maintain their rights and privileges, their rights and liberties in defense of their liberties. And this is a little more all over the place in the Book of Mormon.
Can I just say rights, privileges, and liberties as things that the citizenry are banding together to create an army to fight in order to preserve? Doesn't happen that often in the history of the world.
Yeah, and it probably isn't very common among a Jewish people who have a Jewish culture in the New World, right?
I should probably modify that. That doesn't happen that often in the world and succeeds.
Yeah.
There, I feel more comfortable putting it that way.
Yeah. So just the phrases showing up in both places. Again, one is English, the other is a completely different people, a people of Jewish descent writing in Reformed Egyptian. And just notice a lot of these are in similar places. Alma, 43, 51, 56, 56, 51. They're bunched together. So it's not only that it shares a lot of overlap with the American Revolution and the rhetoric that was used then, but it also comes almost in the same sort of section of the Book of Mormon, which is a bit strange as well. And then we end up with this Mercy Otis Warren, 1728 to 1814. This one here looks like it came out in like 1806. I'm going to make that bigger. 1805 maybe. And so this is before the Book of Mormon as well. And then here are all the similarities that are in that book. Cause of liberty, cause of freedom, cause of their country, rights and privileges, maintain their rights, welfare and happiness, deprive. In other words, Nephites having their own war, writing in Reformed Egyptian, seem to be telling their story in the same way that the American Revolution was narrated in the phrases and words that were used for that. Council of war, prisoners who fell into his hands, art of war, a free government, a free people, a consciousness of their own guilt, a supply of provisions.
Hey, Bill,
Yes.
can I read this comment from Marzipan Carbopoulos that supports this idea?
Yeah.
She says the whole concept of unalienable rights is very 18th century, not pre-Christian Jewish.
Right. The Nephites shouldn't be writing this way. They shouldn't be thinking about their culture in these terms. So the language is one thing. The historical timeline having overlap is another. Being in the same place in the Book of Mormon is another strange coincidence. And we're not done yet. So I'll check a few more of these. This is a consciousness of their own guilt, supply of provisions, took possession of, wandering in the wilderness, chief commander with a part of his army, surrender themselves, prisoners of war. This book has a little bit of overlap. Now, I'm not saying Joseph Smith read the book and plagiarized it. I'm saying that the American Revolution would have been talked about in these kinds of terms as people were telling their stories, and as Joseph Smith is learning through his education or in other places about history, American history. The American Revolution and the events around it would have made up such an important part as newly Americans figured out how to tell their own history. This would have been huge. Okay. RFM, do you remember these, the Book of Mormon reader things that, here's
I
a fun
do.
one.
I
Yeah.
do. Now, one of these versions, and maybe it was a little bit younger for littler kids, but I read that to my firstborn daughter when she was like 2 and 3 years old, and I'd be tucking her in at night. And I remember that the opening lines to it, sorry for this distraction, it'll be quick. The opening lines to it, we're talking about here's Jerusalem, because that's where the Book of Mormon opens, right? In fair Jerusalem, where we lay our scene. So if there's Jerusalem, it says, Jerusalem is a big city. And I would start because we read it all the time. She loved the story. So I say, okay, this is Jerusalem. And then she would say, with those eyes big and round, Jerusalem is a big city.
Yeah.
That book?
That book.
Yeah.
So, read this little, can you read that little caption underneath? And I'll make one little comment and then we'll move on to sort of a different section of this, which I think gets even more interesting.
Okay, underneath it, it says, many kingmen were killed. This is a picture of battle. Some were put into prison. The rest agreed to help defend their country against the Lamanites.
Yeah. That strangely is similar, although I think less people were killed and more were put into prison or at least threatened or at least shamed. The rest agreed to help defend their country against the Lamanites. But wait, there's more. This is Professor Thomas Murphy when he reached out to us in the middle of the week and said, "Hey, is this what you guys are covering?" And we said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I've got some scholarship for that as well." 2 days ago, I read this article by Professor Murphy. He was presenting to uh, the Iroquois Conference on Iroquois Research. This was October 14th, 2023. He mentioned, I believe, this article in one of our conversations with him. I know at least one of our conversations with him was on the third convention. And then I think the other one was neophytes and Lamanites, something along that line. And so, Professor Murphy, thank you very much for your research. This is the next few slides are from his paper. I'm going to skim through them only because the last one about his research sort of gives a summation of all the points that he's making. First off, Oneida is mentioned in the Book of Mormon and is the only mention in the Book of Mormon of an actual people that we know exist. There's the Oneida Native American tribe. And Joseph Smith, when translating the Book of Mormon, uses this term Oneida 3 times. And Professor Murphy points out that in the original Book of Mormon, it's spelled 2 different ways. And then in future editions of the Book of Mormon, it is spelled in a uniform way. That's a big deal because the spellings that were gotten rid of were closer to the spelling of the Native American tribe of Oneida. And so
Oh,
I just want
wow.
to note that.
So
So
in the Book of Mormon, Bill, in the
yeah,
Book of Mormon, they're geological names, right? Or geographical names,
in the
like a
Book of Mormon,
hill or a
yes,
place.
they're geographic locations.
Right.
But again, the Book of Mormon claims to be representative of the ancestors of the Native Americans, and there's an actual Native American tribe that has the same name except for one letter, the Oneidas. And so Dr. Murphy's down there below. You've got his comment. Do you want to read that comment from him?
Helaman, in my reading, Dr. Murphy says, resembles Hendrik Aupaumut, who led Oneidas, Stockbridges, and Brother Towns in battles against Mohawks and Senecas, where they emerged largely unscathed.
Yeah. And so the Oneida is the only place in the Book of Mormon where in the Americas there's a term used in the Book of Mormon that sort of lines up with a Native American tribe in the Americas. And so these are some of the connections that he tries to make. So Oneida, this plus the 7 praying towns equals the people of Ammon. And I'm going to take that comment off for just a second here, RFM.
Mhm.
What he says, you folks out there watching this, you can read the top part, but what Professor Murphy said in the conference was that Amalickiah leads the army desiring to fight their Nephite antagonist and deposes a king, Lahontai, from Oneida. The people from Oneida then separate from the other Amalekites, Iroquoites, and ally themselves with a group called the people of Ammon. The people of Ammon represent 7 cities of Lamanites who converted to Christianity, paralleling the 7 Algonquin praying towns, Stonington, Groton, Charleston, Montauk, Niantic, I don't know how to say that, Farmington, and Mohican, who gathered at Brotherton on Oneida lands shortly before the Revolution, but then fled to Stockbridge. So in this moment in the Book of Mormon, I don't personally think any one of these connections is overwhelmingly strong, but the fact that in one particular part of the Book of Mormon, there are multiple things that line up and overlap seems a little bit strange to me. So that's the first one. As he mentioned there in the earlier comment, Professor Murphy said that Sir William Johnson seems to line up with being similar to Amalickiah, and Sir William Johnson's concubine, Native American wife, because he connected up with Molly Brant after his uh, I forget what the term was, but his legal marriage to his first wife when she passed away, a common law. I don't know, it wasn't common law wife, but it was something like that. And when she passed away, Sir William Johnson then connected up with Molly Brant, a Native American, and that's exactly sort of what happens in the Book of Mormon. So I'm going to take that off again for just a second. If this narrative is starting to sound familiar, he's talking to the Native Americans at this conference. If that narrative is starting to sound familiar at the conference on Iroquois research, then wait a minute, it gets even more interesting. Amalickiah, Sir William, marries the Lamanite queen, Molly Brant, and becomes a Lamanite king. He then leads a band of Nephite dissenters who, much like frontier loyalists, are described as more wild, wicked, and ferocious than the Lamanites. So there's that. And then Sir William Johnson dies in this weird way where it sort of looks like he's been murdered. The medical field of the day determined that it was natural causes.
Are you saying he might have been poisoned, Bill?
It looks sort of like he's poisoned.
By degrees?
He's not super old and he just like dies and it's suddenly and he like has like these body gyrations or whatever. So anyway, he sort of looks like he okay, I love that. So
I'll let you do the honors.
yeah, that's funny. Good stuff. Sir William Johnson dies in such a way that some folks did propose that he was murdered. And Amalickiah, in alliance with the Kingmen, began to prepare for battle against the Nephite freemen, led by a town-destroying Captain Moroni, heralding a banner of liberty. By the way, Native Americans, I learned this from Professor Murphy's paper and then doing some research on my own. Native Americans had the name Town Destroyer for George Washington. It's also the role that Captain Moroni plays as well. Town destroying Captain Moroni heralding a banner of liberty after some initial skirmishes, but just before the grand showdown between the Kingmen and Freemen, Amalickiah, Sir William, is fatigued on a hot day, and despite being surrounded by a camp of warriors, was secretly murdered. Historical sources indicate Sir William, who also died on a hot day, surrounded by a camp of warriors, died of natural causes, but it was an odd death to many. After Amalickiah was found dead, his brother Amaron became the new king, echoing the rise of leadership of Sir William's brother-in-law, Joseph Brant. So a very similar story overlapping. The Hungry Freemen, there's this idea that Native Americans have a tradition where they brought supplies to the colonial army at Valley Forge, for instance. And so there's some talk of that both here, bearing weapons of war. Again, with these same Oneida people, there's a group of them that bury their weapons of war. So you have another piece of overlap. There's the fathers feed the armies at Judea or Valley Forge. So you have that overlap. And then I'll just note, Professor Murphy suggests that there's 3 places where Joseph Smith might have gotten some of these stories. And he notes that Joseph Smith in the Iroquois country, the Handsome Lake story, Iroquois tutors, Moore's Charity School, which for those who remember is Dartmouth College. And we had Randall Bell on that episode helping us understand that connection. That episode's up to 22,000 views, by the way, Arfin. Pretty good for us. I can't hear you, my friend.
Wow, huge for us, huge. By
Right.
the way, the whole Freeman thing. Remember the earliest published or printed document in the United States that Mark Hoffman was trying to copy and sell for a huge price to whoever it was, the Library of Congress or whoever it was? That was the Oath of a Freeman.
The Oath of a Freeman.
Yeah.
Hmm. And then the last one, and Professor Murphy let me know that he actually has this image wrong. That is not an image of Human's Tavern, but there was a tavern owned by a gentleman with the last name Human, where Joseph Smith and maybe one of his brothers spent some time. And there would have been a lot of folks from the War of 1812, old soldiers, having a drink and telling old war stories. And Professor Murphy might join us at the very end of the show to share some thoughts on this episode. I hope that we do see you, Professor Murphy. But I will note that any one of these three could have filled in much of these stories. And these also, some of this would have just been sort
Danger
of,
Will Robinson. Sorry, Dr. Murphy is saying something about the picture.
yes. Yep. And it's just what I said, which is the picture is wrong. Picture of Human's Tavern is the wrong one. The correct one will be in his book. And he does have a book that's coming out. And Professor Murphy, when you do come on, if you would please let folks know about the upcoming book, that would be great.
You had already addressed it. I apologize. This is me trying to multitask.
No worries. So Moore's Charity School is Dartmouth. If you don't know that story, go back and listen to the Joseph Smith Secret Education, the Dartmouth Connection, where we had Dr. Randall Bell on to talk about that. And then, I just note Moore's Indian Charity School is a very familiar story to those of us on this side of things who've been researching Mormonism, the connection to Dartmouth. And then, so I will read the conclusion here. Oneida is the only clearly identifiable indigenous place name from Turtle Island in the Book of Mormon. It appears in the text, set in ancient rather than colonial America. When read allegorically, the 19th century narrative of the Book of Mormon embeds the place name Oneida within a series of wars that culminate with a showdown between freemen and kingmen. The kingmen are led by a series of leaders that bear some remarkable similarities with Sir William Johnson, Molly Brant, and Joseph Brant, and might I add, George Washington. They clash with armies led by, this is it. They clash with armies led by characters that resemble the town destroyer, which is Captain Moroni or George Washington, George Clinton, Marquis de Lafayette, and Hendrik Appelmont. Is that how you said that, RFM?
I spelled it. I think it's Marquis, though. Marquis de Lafayette.
And then Hendrik Appelmont. Sounds good enough for me.
I
And
just
then
have to use my outrageous French accent.
Yeah. The Oneida's ally with 7 relocated praying towns that resemble Brotherton and Stockbridge. While wintering at a site resembling Valley Forge, a party from the group identified with Oneida's brings important provisions at a critical moment in a long year, just like what happened at Valley Forge. Any one of those by themselves isn't anything, but all added up together sort of seems like a strange bunch of overlap. But wait, there's more. Anything you want to say, RFM, before we get into what really to me was the crux of why this episode had to be done, so that there was a video record of this conversation in terms of what these similarities were between the Book of Mormon and the American Revolution. Anything from you?
Well, this is pretty remarkable. And this gets my attention, definitely. James K is asking, is this a call-in show? The answer is yes. 3 calls at the end of the show. It's not like Mormonism After Dark. If you're wondering if we take them during the show, no. This is at the end of the show, though. Hope you'll hang around for that. Thanks. Yeah, it's absolutely incredible, but please amaze me.
Yeah, here's where I think it gets, and this is where I think it gets the most interesting. What if we told you that both narratives referred to a standard of liberty? RFM, will you read Alma 46:36?
And it came to pass also that that's got to be Captain Moroni, right? He's the one. He hoisted the title of liberty to be hoisted. No, he caused the title of liberty to be hoisted upon every tower, which was in all the land, which was possessed by the Nephites. And thus Moroni planted the standard of liberty among the Nephites.
Standard of Liberty. By the way, you noticed this. I don't know if it was in preparation for this episode or if you said something in the conversation with Ganesh, but if you take a flag and you write words on it, it assumes that everybody can read it.
Yeah.
Which also testifies once again that this is a culture with established literacy. And yet, as Dr. Lundwall has pointed out, we don't find any item ever in the Americas that has the kind of writing on it that would indicate a culture of literacy. Now, apologists come in and go, no, there's these 3 items and they've got this little bit of writing on them. Dr. Lundwall's already addressed that. It is a lesser form. It is the bridge between non-literacy and literacy, those items. They are not the kind of literacy that is spoken of in the Book of Mormon, and that is apologists trying to play a trick on you. So anyway, go ahead, RFM.
Oh, let me see. I'm sorry. I was looking at what Dan Vogel was saying. I'll put it back up there as well. Always honored to have Dan Vogel in the audience. Yeah, this idea that you got a flag, right? Well, look, flags have been around a long time. I don't know the history of flags, but I imagine they've been around a long time, or something like them, a standard to carry into battle that is followed by the troops. But if you're going to inspire something and you write on it, I mean, are there that many flags that are just writing? I think there's a little writing in a lot of flags, maybe, but not just writing, for crying out loud. And if that's going to inspire anybody, you got to be able to read it, which means probably it presumes a highly literate society, even among the poor guys who have to go out and fight the battles. So that was the first thing. The second thing, I can't remember right now. It came to pass that he hoisted the title of, caused it to be hoisted upon every tower. Excuse me, Dan. And planting the standard of liberty among the Nephites. You know, this is one of those things that every time I read through the Book of Mormon, there were places where it was difficult, where I sort of where it looked so cribbed. It looked so not real. It looked so fictionalized. How about that? That, yeah, I had to always look away a bit and read through it quickly, like I'm whistling past the graveyard. And this was one of those points, because it looks like the Revolutionary War. It looks like Joseph Smith is writing what he knew.
Yeah, and so we end up with the standard of liberty in Joseph Smith's time, you know, in the American Revolution leading up to Joseph Smith having this information. They were not a literate society. Well, that's
Richard might be responding to somebody else. I don't know that he's talking to us.
Yeah.
If it wasn't clear, what I was saying is this is what the Book of Mormon presumes, is that there was a literate society in many different places. And that's the only reason that's important, is because of the apologists coming back and saying, well, the Nephites were not a literate society. And that's why we don't find their writings everywhere, right? So they weren't a literate society. But then you have all these other places in the Book of Mormon stories that indicate, yes, it was a highly literate society, which means that apologetic crashes and burns. And yes, we should expect, according to the terms of the Book of Mormon, to find lots of things written in ancient Hebrew or Egyptian derivative kind of symbols in the Americas.
Yeah, it's not only King Benjamin writing down his address and copying it out and passing it out. It's also when Jesus comes to the Nephites, he says, have you not read in the Revelation? Have you not read in the scriptures? He's condemning the people for not having known the thing that they should know by reading the scriptures. And that's the message that Christ gives them. It's almost like he didn't get the memo that these guys can't read. So there's that. So the standard of liberty shows up again. George Washington sends out this is to George Washington from the United States Congress, 23 December 1783. The document is on the left. It's not the original document, but it's transcribed. And then down below, I took just the pertinent section, and it says there, having defended the standard of liberty in this new world. And so this would have been a common term, standard of liberty, in reference to the American Revolution. But it happens again. After George Washington was welcomed to Camden, South Carolina by local officials in the afternoon of 25th of May, 1791. He was given a public reception and dinner at which an address, quote, signed by the order of the inhabitants of Camden and its vicinity, unquote, which was signed by William Lang, Joseph and James Kershaw, John Chestnut, Adam Fowler, Brisbane, Joseph Brevard, Samuel Boykin, Douglas Stark, Dr. Isaac Alexander, and Isaac Dubois, was presented this, and it also says, the venerated chief who heretofore under the standard of liberty. So that was common. So we have this idea in both stories, within the same story that we're talking about, this phrase of standard of liberty. There seems to be some reference to a flag in Moroni's instance, and how the United States flag is such an important image in the American Revolution and often in the pictures with George Washington. But what if we told you that both narratives have that standard or title of liberty saying almost the same thing?
Okay. Now, at this point, this is where my mind got officially blown. Up to this point, it's interesting, but okay, so what? Now we take the jump off the cliff, and you'll find out.
Yeah. So Alma 43, verse 9, RFM.
And now the design of the Nephites was to support their lands and their houses and their wives and their children, that they might preserve them from the hands of their enemies, and also that they might preserve their rights and their privileges, yea, and also their liberty, that they might worship God according to their desires. Now, is this saying what was on this? No, this isn't the title of liberty writing.
No, this is another part in the Book of Mormon a little earlier where sort of the same concept is covered.
Right.
Now we get to the title of liberty, Alma 46, verse 12.
Okay. And it came to pass that he rent his coat, and he took a piece thereof and wrote upon it, in memory of our God, our religion and freedom, and our peace, our wives, and our children. And he fastened it upon the end of a pole. That is in the Book of Mormon, Alma 46, verse 12.
A pole. Now, that's a weird word in ancient America. It seems like a stick or a limb, but a pole. So there's that. Okay, but you do have this in memory of our God, our religion and freedom, and our peace, our wives, and our children. Now, what if George Washington had said something almost identical to that? In an address to the inhabitants of Canada, 14th September, that's my birthday, 1775. Document is on the left. I made it bigger there on the right. Washington says, "Come then, my brethren, unite with us I'm not going to get that right. Indissoluble is what it means, but indissoluble. Yeah, union. Let us run together to the same goal. We have taken up arms in defense of our liberty, our property, our wives, and our children, and we are determined to preserve them or die." That's George Washington's words. And so now I have both of them here. We have taken up arms in defense of our liberty, our property, our wives, and our children. We are determined to preserve them or die. And then Captain Moroni, in memory of our God, our religion and freedom, and our peace and our wives and our children. And they're similar enough that in line with all the other things that we've talked about tonight, one has to truly wonder whether Joseph Smith is taking from the stories of the American Revolution and using it to formulate a story in the Book of Mormon. Now, I want to note here, I'm actually going to put something else up on the screen. Same site, but it's off of my computer screen rather than an image. This is a website, LDS Answers. Now, if I go to About, these guys are faithful. Latter-day Answers, LDSanswers.org, promotes, markets, and distributes material that strengthens faith in Jesus Christ and supports the restoration. This is a faithful, believing site. He is so convinced about this that he is the place where I got most of my information from, because he notes that the title of liberty is articulated by George Washington almost in the same way that Moroni does the title of liberty in the Americas. And he's the one who proceeds to note all of the similarities within other documents about the American Revolution.
Wait a second. This cat thinks it's a good thing?
Yeah, and I'll get to that here as we get to the bottom and see the comments. He's the one that's noting all of this overlap. He's convinced there's something that connects George Washington and Moroni because he sees so much overlap that he can't exactly explain it away. And somebody comes in and says, I may be missing something here, but doesn't that prove the point of a young, impressionable 19th century boy plagiarizing popular text and quotes from the heroes of his day? And then he goes on to list not only George Washington, but Emanuel Swedenborg and the Bible, Masonic rituals. He goes on and names a bunch of them. Here's what the folk from the side. No, I don't see it that way. I can understand why you do, though, and why others would. So they're noting that I can see all the similarities and I can see the conclusion you're drawing. I can see why you would draw that conclusion, but that's not the conclusion I can draw. Now, notice what he said. The person here says next. The difference may be because with every fiber of my being, I know the Book of Mormon is true. In other words, when you start with the conclusion and work backwards, you can hold on to that. Well, there's a lot of similarity, but I already know the church is true, so I can just dismiss it out of hand.
I can understand why you would feel the way you do because the evidence is all on your side, but you're wrong because I know I'm right.
Yeah. Yeah. And people want to stand up for that. Annette, what a wonderful reply. That's what's missing from most Christianity today. Anyway, so there's a bunch of comments there, but I just want to note, faithful, believing author, and they're the one where I got a ton of information that helped put this episode together. Did George Washington quote Captain Moroni's title of liberty by Latter-day Answers? And so Latter-day Answers notes all the similarity, but sees it as a faithful thing. So there's that. Okay.
Those kind of websites and arguments, I call it's time to embrace the madness.
Yeah.
We're going to accept it all, baby, and we're going to acknowledge it's all true. But then we're going to say, see?
Ta-da.
It proves the church is true.
Yeah. I want to turn the time over to you now because there is more, right, RFM?
Yes, there is. Hang on just a second. Well, I tell you what, I'll just include you all in this. This will be a little bit like Mormonism After Dark.
A little similar. There you go.
Time for a moment of product placement.
Yeah. This episode of Mormonism Live brought to you by Sprite. Quench your thirst with the lemon lime flavor of a cold Sprite today.
I wonder if you can get sued for promoting someone else's product.
No one's paid me for anything.
I know. Okay, so let me see here. Oh, yeah. So when you told me that you were going to be doing the show on this subject, which is how it works, everybody, it reminded me of a paper that I had read back in the 80s. It was written by this fellow right here, Richard Bushman, and acclaimed Mormon historian, titled The Book of Mormon and the American Revolution. And I remembered, even after all this time, that the thrust of his paper was to argue that even though the Book of Mormon looks a lot like post-revolutionary war America, okay, it really doesn't, because if you look at it even closer, then you find out that there's things in it that don't match that mold. All the big things, it's like all the big building blocks are total fits, but in these little details, it doesn't match. So therefore, it's an apologetic piece, unfortunately. And I think that in the process, Richard Bushman doesn't bring his best thinking into the game. And he appears to avoid obvious scriptures, at least obvious to me, that'd be obvious to you too, that seem to contradict his conclusions. So we're at an hour and 10 minutes here. I'm going to try and just go through this really quickly. Okay, everybody? The first thing he does, and I want to go over here, okay, because I have it over here as well. Oh, I don't know if that's going to work. Let me get that out of there. I just want to try and read that part. Okay, so Bushman, this is the abstract. Bushman has, forget it, I already told you what the abstract is. Okay, here's this part. This is him writing, okay? And you would almost think he's almost giving away the game. He is giving in and conceding so much at the outset. And what it says is the Book of Mormon, much like the Old Testament, was written to show Israel what great things the Lord God hath done for their fathers, blah, blah, blah. The narrative touches only incidentally on the society, economics, and politics of the Nephites and Jaredites, leaving us to rely on oblique references and occasional asides to reconstruct total cultures. Now, there's some truth to that, certainly. The irony is that he's going to be relying on these oblique asides that he correctly identifies them as, in order to try and make his argument that even though it looks a lot like the American Revolution, it really isn't the American Revolution. And believe it or not, his argument is that it looks more like the Bible than the American Revolution. Okay, spoiler alert, that was it. And he tries to say the ancient Near East as often as he can, but all of his examples come from the Bible, which he acknowledges. Is this making any sense so far, Bill?
Yep. He's noting similarities between post-revolution America, but also pointing out that it's not the only thing we see. Hence, there's room for faith still.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. So while we value these scraps of information, the political passages, it must be recognized, expose the book to attack. Now, this is interesting. He writes this. We've got to recognize that these political passages expose the book to attack. The more specific the record, the more easily its verity can be tested. This was published in 1982. Does this sound like someone who's a true believing Mormon?
I've always wondered about where Richard Bushman's real feelings are.
This sounds like somebody who's very concerned about keeping the target as small as possible, because they know that the more specifics the Book of Mormon has, the more it's going to be shown to be wrong on. All right. The more specific the record, the more easily its verity can be tested. Right, it's truthfulness. Details about government make it possible to ask if the political forms are genuinely ancient or if they bear the marks of 19th century creation, which is going to end up being the Bible or 19th century. The late Thomas O'Day, a sympathetic but critical scholar, thought that, and here's the quote from O'Day, which is right along the lines of saying, yeah, it's Americana at its finest. This is what he wrote. American sentiments permeate the work, the Book of Mormon, American sentiments. In it are found the democratic, the republican, the anti-monarchical, and the egalitarian doctrines that pervade the climate of opinion in which it was conceived, and that enter into the expressions and concerns of its Nephite kings, prophets, and priests, as naturally as they later come from the mouths of Mormon leaders preaching to the people in Utah. That's Thomas O'Day. This is a reactive and a responsive paper that Richard Bushman is writing, because it's obvious to everybody, even serious scholars, even those who are sympathetic, like he says Thomas O'Day is, to say, yeah, it's obvious where this came from. And this is what all these interests reflect, including what Bill was talking about, the title of liberty and all these kinds of things. Going back to what Richard Bushman writes, that kind of indictment, can we go back to where we were? Is that okay? Thank you. That kind of indictment would be precluded were the Book of Mormon exclusively and narrowly religious. So in other words, we couldn't get this kind of criticism if the Book of Mormon just stuck to religion and left politics out of it. But it doesn't. Bushman seems to dwell on this. As it is, O'Day purports to find evidence of 19th century American political culture in the Book of Mormon. For example, the prophecy of the American Revolution early in Nephi's narrative. The prophecy of the American Revolution early on in Nephi's narrative, First Nephi 12 through 14, that vision, 11 through 14, the vision that Nephi has of the future, and part of it, like 1 or 2 verses, is of the American Revolution. Early in Nephite's narrative. And later, the switch in the Book of Mormon from monarchy to government by elected judges. All right. On first reading, both have a modern and American flavor. I want to say something here because it occurred to me earlier, Bill, and I forgot to say it earlier. One of the funny things about the Book of Mormon is that we've been talking about all these Nephite kings. You know, I mean, they're kings all over the place in the Book of Mormon. And I just think it stands sort of in contrast to what we read about in the very first book of the Book of Mormon, where it talks about that there shall be no kings upon the land. You know? I'm sorry, are you talking, Bill?
Yeah, it is strange that this new world was supposed to be kingless, and then a large segment of Nephite history is full of kings.
It's almost like the king part is talking through time directly to the newly formed United States of America and really doesn't have a lot to do with the narrative of the book that has already been written because of the Mosiah First Priority before they got to First Nephi.
Yeah.
Okay. I tell you what, I'm going to skip over a bunch of stuff here. But what he does is this, okay? He mentions the political milieu of Joseph Smith's New York. And he spends all this time showing how Joseph Smith would absolutely have been inundated all the time with talk about the patriotism and of the Revolutionary War and of the heroic endeavors. And it was just like, you know, regular July 4th around here, but times 10, times 20, because it was that much more recent. People were alive who had fought in the Revolutionary War. I think it was Joseph Smith's granddad. Yeah, I think he had a granddad who fought in the Revolutionary War. His dad may have fought in the War of 1812. I think someone had mentioned that. I'm not sure if that's true, but I think someone had mentioned that. So he shows absolutely he would have been inundated with it. It's not a question in his mind. And that's what he does here in this section. And then what he says is this. Let me go back to here. Because what he's going to do is he's going to say, yeah. It looks like it all the way. But I'm going to take 3 elements of the American Revolution, and I'm going to look in the Book of Mormon, and I'm going to show you that these 3 elements are not represented in the Book of Mormon. In fact, it's the opposite. Okay? So therefore, if we look closer at the Book of Mormon, his argument is, then we'll see that it's not as American revolutionary like as it appears at first blush. So let's see here. It says, my purpose is to test that conclusion by comparing some of the most obvious contemporaneous ideas about government in the American Revolution with political ideas and practices in the Book of Mormon. There are 3 that were prominent in the political literature of the 1820s. First, the depiction of the American Revolution as heroic resistance against tyranny. See, that's the first one, and he'll devote his next section to that. Second, the belief that people overthrow their kings under the stimulus of enlightened ideas of human rights. And third, the conviction that constitutional arrangements such as frequent elections, separation of powers, and popularly elected assemblies were necessary to control power. Wow. I read this yesterday, and then I thought, I need to read it again. So I read it again this morning. I'm glad I did, because I think I understand his arguments better. Here's my take on his argument, okay? So after acknowledging how influenced Joseph Smith must have been by the Revolutionary War and the principles of Republican government, and after acknowledging and tacitly agreeing that other scholars, such as O'Day, see a great deal of then contemporary United States governmental ideas in the Book of Mormon, Richard Bushman is going to take 3 such Republican principles, which he thinks the Book of Mormon does not follow so well, and from that suggests that the Book of Mormon is essentially different from Republican principles. Read the paper, decide for yourself whether Bushman's arguments are persuasive. I do not find them so. Bushman is essentially doing an unparallel of the Book of Mormon. Remember, we talked about that before when John Welch did an unparallel of the view of the Hebrews. as it relates to the Book of Mormon. And this was his attempt to show that all the parallels that B.H. Roberts and others have seen between the view of Hebrews and the Book of Mormon don't matter, because there's all these differences, and that's the unparalleled, right? And he went through this huge, laborious exercise of going through and writing down all the things in the view of the Hebrews that you don't find in the Book of Mormon. The reason why I find that kind of argument, and I see this as a similar kind of argument, the reason I find that argument unpersuasive is because what you're saying is it has to be an exact copy. It can't plagiarize 1, 2, 3, 4, 10, or 20 ideas. It has to plagiarize all of the ideas, or it's not really plagiarism. When the reality is, and I remember a specific paper I wrote for my creative writing class in Sumner High School. The reality is when you're plagiarizing a story, you're taking certain parts of the story that appeal to you, but you plug in different facts to cover the other elements so that it's not obvious what you're doing. And it seems like that's never even occurred to you. Or if it has, you're just sort of winking at it and pretending that that's not something that happens all the time. Does that make sense, Bill?
In fact, RFM, the best intelligent, methodical plagiarizers would crib only the necessary material in order to shorten the amount of time they need to spend on a project, and would make it look different enough from other things so as to never get caught.
Yes, very much so. So let me see here. What I want to state this. I hadn't even gotten through it. Bushman is essentially doing an unparalleled of the Book of Mormon against the criticism that it seems to obviously derive from the United States government and history. Even if Bushman were right about the 3 less than obvious examples he mentions, right? I don't think they're that obvious. But he can find 3 things that he identifies, and probably rightfully so, with Republican government, et cetera, and the time period that aren't found in the Book of Mormon. And that really doesn't do a lot to, I think, lessen the impact of how it reads. It reads like a Revolutionary War tract in places, or a pamphlet, or a description of things that are going on. Even if Bushman were right about the 3 less than obvious examples he mentions, it can either mean that Joseph Smith's understanding of the U.S. government was not perfect. See, that's one explanation. He would have copied it better, except he didn't understand it. He's not an expert on it. Indeed, whose understanding is perfect about it today? Or that Joseph Smith was using some creativity to fill in the gaps, which is the most likely, right? That's what I'm talking about. There's plagiarizing, and then there's covering up the plagiarism. Or that Joseph Smith was using some creativity to fill in the gaps. But wait, Bushman will actually give us the source of the Book of Mormon governmental systems that don't match the United States. And it happens to be one of the only things Joseph Smith knew as well as the history and government of the young United States. And that was the Bible. Not making this up. He actually writes this. And this is toward the end in his conclusionary part. He says, the same holds, wait, let me lead into it with, whereas the Book of Mormon practice of making kings at the behest of the people clashed with American assumptions that fit the biblical tradition, okay? The same holds for reliance on traditional law instead of a representative legislature and indifference to the separation of powers. Not every biblical political tradition reappeared in the Book of Mormon, all right? Not every biblical political tradition reappeared in the Book of Mormon, but there are biblical precedents for most of the Nephite practices which are not at home in provincial upstate New York. Let me say that again. There are biblical precedents for most of the Nephite practices which are not at home in provincial upstate New York. The templates for Book of Mormon politics seem quite consistently to have been cut from the Bible. So here's what I'm sorry. I thought I had a comment card about it. So what he's telling us is this. Everything about government and politics that's in the Book of Mormon is either from Joseph Smith's neighborhood or it's from the Bible. Did he not just say that, Bill?
He says that, And he seems to also make the argument that because there's some things from his neighborhood, it couldn't have been a plagiarism from the Bible exactly. And because there's things from the Bible, it can't be a plagiarism from his neighborhood exactly. But I would beg to differ and say that it could be an incredibly well done plagiarism from both.
Very good. I just want to talk about this first one. I'm not going to talk about the other two in any detail. But his first example of something that he connects with the Revolutionary War in Joseph Smith's time period that's not reflected in the Book of Mormon is this idea of heroic resistance or divine deliverance. And what he's talking about here is that in all the speeches and all the literature of Joseph Smith's day, we're talking about the liberators as heroes, the Revolutionary Wars as heroes. They're not so much delivered by the power of God. I mean, God's involved and God shines upon it. And this is what God wanted, of course, right? But the heroes, right? This is the heroes who are making this happen under God's beneficence. So this is what he's talking about. And he says, this isn't there in the Book of Mormon. He says, Mormons, while American orators blessed God for delivering them from British slavery, they never permitted their gratitude to shade the heroism of the patriots. That's what he says. What's Randall Bell saying? If someone takes one sentence for Shakespeare without attribution, it's plagiarism. Damn right, and it should be. Good point. Okay, so this is the quote. See, I repeated that quote from Richard Bushman on the top of the screen where it says, while American orators bless God for delivering them from British slavery, they never permitted their gratitude to shade the heroism of the patriots. Although Bushman writes this in reference to Nephi's brief vision of the Revolutionary War, he overlooks an obvious example from the Book of Mormon that contradicts his thesis. And the reason I came back and I reread this again today was because I wanted to make sure that if I was going to say this, that it was true. And I believe it is true. Not only does he overlook an obvious example from the Book of Mormon that contradicts his thesis, he doesn't even mention it. It's not referenced there. Additionally, we can envision Joseph Smith trying to limit the amount of details in Nephi's vision about the Revolutionary War and Columbus and the Pilgrims, right? Due to the fact it was supposed to have been seen by Nephi 2,000 years in advance, and too many details might spoil the illusion. I think he gave plenty of details as it was. But yeah, he's got to be a little bit vague on this, for crying out loud. It can't be just like, you chose the seven of spades. You got to work up to it. Okay. So this is the idea. Now, that Bushman is talking about, okay? So with the hero, is this what everybody else thought? Okay, don't even look at the screen. Can anybody think of a passage in the Book of Mormon that is read all the time, especially on, I don't know, Independence Day? And when you're talking about Captain Moroni and what a great leader he was, this sounds exactly like what Bushman is saying is not in the Book of Mormon. Bill, could you read this for me?
Alma chapter 48, 11, 12, 13, and then 17. And Moroni was a strong and mighty man. He was a man of a perfect understanding, yea, a man that did not delight in bloodshed, a man whose soul did joy in the liberty. By the way, he didn't joy in bloodshed, but remember what he was threatening to the neutrals, in the Book of Mormon. He wanted to kill them. He wanted to.
He didn't like it, though.
No, yeah. He was begging Pahoran to give him the right to kill people.
It's a dirty job.
I just want to
got to do it.
I just want to note the contradiction. Okay. A man of perfect understanding, yea, a man who did not delight in bloodshed except for that one time, a man whose soul did joy in the liberty and freedom of his country and his brethren from bondage and slavery. Yea,
this is George Washington right now. Okay. This is George Washington. Please continue.
Yea, a man whose heart did swell with thanksgiving to his God for the many privileges and blessings which he bestowed upon his people. A man who did labor exceedingly for the welfare and safety of his people. Yea, he was a man who was firm in the faith of Christ, and he had sworn with an oath to defend his people, his rights, and his country, and his religion, even to the loss of blood. Yea, verily, verily, I say unto you, if all men had been and were and ever would be like unto Moroni.
Crescendo.
Yeah, behold, the very powers of hell would have been shaken forever. Yea, the devil would never have power over the hearts of the children of men. Where were you, Richard Bushman, when this verse should have been read?
He doesn't even deal with it.
Hmm.
Now, I could imagine he's saying, well, okay, but yeah, this really sounds like the opposite of what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about against the tyrant, and he's doing against an opposing military force or something like. Okay, you need to address it. When you're saying the book, when you're looking at that one verse, that one little passage in First Nephi, predicting the Revolutionary War, which doesn't give a lot of details and gives all the glory to God, right? And that's your thesis. You should deal with the evidence that contradicts your thesis and possibly modify it.
RFM, it's even made worse by the fact that Captain Moroni seems to be in the similitude of George Washington. Hence,
Exactly.
this verse should have stuck out even more than other verses did.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and that's what I meant when I said this is George Washington.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it is. Okay, so the only difference is that Moroni did not ride a white tapir.
No, he didn't.
No. What's going on next? Oh, summary. Here's my summary. Richard Bushman writes an apologetic paper, and this is dangerous, okay? When you're going to start, you're a historian, you're going to write an apologetic piece, and you're going to find you're going to be bending your historical or historian's principles to cater to the apologetics. And that's what happened here, I think. I realize I'm totally out of my league, punching out of my weight, and because this is Richard Bushman. But I think if you read the paper, and we got a link to it, I put the link to it in the show notes at the very end, Bill.
Okay.
On the outline.
Yeah, I'll make sure that they make it. I'll make sure that they make it into the show.
Right. So summary, Richard Bushman writes an apologetic paper trying to distinguish the Book of Mormon from the Republican principles in U.S. history it obviously contains by focusing on 3 Republican principles he feels are contravened in the Book of Mormon. But we see that one of these principles, the one we just talked about, is giving all the glory to God for victory at the expense of extolling the magnificence of the patriots. That's one of the things he talks about. We have seen the Book of Mormon contradicts him, Bushman, on this with the example of Captain Moroni. Bushman is cherry picking his examples. So the second one, and I'm going to go through these super quick, was enlightenment and popular opposition to monarchy. The only thing I want to say here is that I feel that in this section and the things he talks about, I'm not going to be more specific because it's going to take too long. Read the paper. I think that he should have dealt with both of these ideas. Alma 117, where it talks about the law could have no power on any man for his belief. Sounds like freedom of religion, doesn't it? Alma 37. Now, that's 30, verse 7. Now there was no law against a man's belief. And these are in the context of Nehor and Korihor, respectively. Alma 1 and Alma 30. So that all I mean is that when he's talking about enlightenment and popular opposition to monarchy, I think that this should have been addressed. The third one was the reign of the judges and American constitutional government. There, I think that he should have dealt more fully with Mosiah 29, because there's a whole speech there, for crying out loud, which outlines the Republican government that King Mosiah II, right, is going to be now instituting, because neither of his kids will take on them the kingship, because they want to go off and preach the gospel to the Lamanites. And King Mosiah is correctly concerned about bringing in somebody else outside the line, which could spark civil wars. So he says, we're changing it all. Okay, we're scrubbing it all. We're going to do this Republican form of government. And he gives a speech about it in Mosiah 29, the last chapter of Mosiah. Could you read this and see if this sounds at all similar, I don't know, to the United States?
And behold, now I say unto you, ye cannot dethrone an iniquitous king, save it be through much contention and the shedding of much blood. For behold, he has his friends in iniquity, and he keepeth his guards about him.
Now, an apologist would say the king was not dethroned. Okay, you're right. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And he teareth up the laws of those. He was dethroned from ruling in the Americas.
Okay, yeah, well, that's
Does that make
true.
sense?
Yes.
And he teareth up the laws of those who have reigned in righteousness before him, and he trampleth under his feet the commandments of God. And he enacteth laws and sendeth them forth among his people, yea, laws after the manner of his own wickedness, and whosoever doth not obey his laws, he causeth to be destroyed.
And those might be those acts,
Yep.
Stamp Acts, T Acts,
Yep.
Townsend Acts.
Yeah. And whosoever doth rebel against him, he will send his armies against them to war. And if he can, he will destroy them.
That's
And
why I underlined that.
yeah.
That's the Revolutionary War right there. And whosoever doth rebel against him, this wicked king, he will send his armies against them to war. And if he can, he will destroy them.
And thus an unrighteous king doth pervert the ways of all righteousness. And now, behold, I say unto you, it is not expedient that such abomination should come upon you.
Yes. So let me go over here. Oh, I'm sorry. That speech has so much in it. Popular elections are also contemplated in the same speech. So this is Mosiah 29. That was Mosiah 29, 21 through 24. This continues with 25 through 27. Are you up for that?
Yep. Therefore, choose you by the voice of this people judges, that ye may be judged according to the laws which have been given you by our fathers, which are correct, and which were given them by the hand of the Lord. Now it is not common that the voice of the people desireth anything contrary to that which is
This
right,
is a democracy.
but it is common for the lesser part of the people to desire that which is not right. Therefore, this shall ye observe and make it your law to do your business by the voice of the people.
This is a democracy.
And if the time comes that the voice of the people doth choose iniquity, then is the time that the judgments of God will come upon you. Yea, this is the time he will visit you with great destruction, even as he has hitherto visited this land.
Right. And now, as if that isn't enough, in the same speech, this is the last one in the speech, 28 through 30 from Mosiah 29, the system of judicial appeals. And now, if ye have judges and they do not judge you according to the law which has been given, ye can cause that they may be judged of a higher judge. This seems rather sophisticated and somewhat familiar. If your higher judges do not judge righteous judgments, ye shall cause that a small number of your lower judges should be gathered together, and they shall judge your higher judges according to the voice of the people. Now, what the hell that means, I have no idea. But I don't know why you got your lower judges getting together to judge your higher judges, because that doesn't sound like that makes any sense. It sounds like it might make sense to a person who thinks that that sort of evens things out, but I think it builds in. I mean, you got people then who are making decisions on their own decision, which they made originally, but now it's been reversed by this judge. And so now they're going to get together in a smaller group of judges. Yeah. Okay. So I command you to do these things in the fear of the Lord. Oh, no. If your higher judges do not judge righteous judgments, right, a smaller number, they shall judge your higher judges. Okay. And then what does this mean? According to the voice of the people. That's what I mean. What does that mean? I understand the appellate process. I don't understand where the voice of the people comes in. Unless they're talking about the voice of the people is the one that picks these judges in the first place. Maybe. And I command you to do these things in the fear of the Lord, and I command you to do these things, another repetition, and that ye have no king, that if these people commit sins and iniquities, they shall be answered upon their own heads. All right. So no king, system of judicial appeals. Is that exactly the way it works in the U.S.? No, not at all. Do we think that Joseph Smith was an expert on how it worked? I don't think so. Do I think that Joseph Smith wanted to mirror it exactly and say, yeah, we've got a Senate over here, and we've got a House of Representatives over here, and we've got a Supreme Court over here, and we've got a president here, and this is all the Nephites? Yeah, that might have been a dead giveaway. I think even Joseph Smith could figure that one out.
Can I just note something, RFM, right along with what you're saying? So I asked ChatGPT, I said, what can you tell me about early America, seeing America as having more focus on judges rather than the president, as a juxtaposition to kings from England, which they broke away from? And when you think about it, a president without a judicial system is a king. So early America, what you would have seen if you're Joseph Smith and your dad and your grandfather, and they fought in these wars and they got for your freedom, and John Hancock and John Adams and Monroe and all these guys get together, Madison, they all get together and they form the country. Putting a judicial system in is the secret to not allowing things to get out of hand. It's the check and balance to the king. I can see how Joseph Smith would have had so much emphasis on judges as the juxtaposition to kings. That seems like a natural reaction to this new American country. Anyway, my 2 cents there. I can't hear you, my friend.
Back in the bicentennial in 1976, I was 16 years old. So I was immersed in this huge patriotism throughout the country on all 3 networks and PBS. There was just this patriotism everywhere. And it was incredible. It was exhilarating. It was intoxicating. And I felt it again just last summer when I was with Randy Bell at the Old North Church in Boston. Oh my gosh, I was having a huge spiritual experience. It not only took me back to the founding of the country, it took me back to when I was 16. And I'm not sure which was more exhilarating. So anyway, what's this say? Oh, is this something you wrote under my name, Bill?
This is just the opening paragraph from ChatGPT. Early America's emphasis on judges and the judiciary, rather than an all-powerful executive, was a direct reaction to British monarchical rule. The founding fathers sought to avoid the concentrated power of a king and instead created a system where legal authority was dispersed with a particular emphasis on the rule of law.
Wow. So
Yeah.
what you're saying is, or what Hal is saying, the AI thing is saying,
Yeah.
is that what the Book of Mormon is saying is, in focusing on the judiciary, is exactly what was going on in the
Yep.
country,
Yep.
focusing on the judiciary in response to the monarchy.
Yep. You nailed it.
Amazing. And he's doing that in real time, folks. Now, this last thing, this whole discourse in Mosiah 29, which you'd think would be pretty important to talk about in a paper like this, Richard Bushman really doesn't even deal with this long discourse on government in Mosiah 29 in the body of his paper, but reserves his comments for a lengthy footnote, which is footnote 24. Bushman doesn't deal at all with Alma 1:17 or 30 and 7 that mention freedom of belief or religion, is the obvious implication. Freedom of religion is freedom of belief. Nor does Bushman mention the encomium to Captain Moroni in Alma 48 that I quoted and you read at length about, if everybody was as great as Captain Moroni, then the devil would go and hide his face and hell would be shaken forever. He doesn't mention that, which contradicts his conclusion, I believe, that the Book of Mormon gives all credit to God and does not glorify its heroes. Ultimately, Richard Bushman ends up demonstrating that although much in the Book of Mormon does follow Republican principles in U.S. history, the elements that do not are readily found in the Bible. So the entire content of the Book of Mormon in this regard of politics, government, etc., is made up of 2 things young Joseph knew best: U.S. history of the Revolutionary War and the Bible. Coincidence?
Yeah, look at Vogel's comment. It's obvious Bushman is gaslighting us.
Oh, wow. That's unfortunate, isn't it? By the way, I wanted to bring this up here, okay? Because this is also from his paper, and it has to do with that bombshell that you had, where he says about the title of liberty. One episode that may to a casual reader have a Republican flavor is General Moroni's elevation of the title of liberty, on which he wrote, in memory of our God, our religion, and freedom, and our peace, and our wives, and our children. Around this emblem, he rallied the people against a movement to raise up a king. While the word liberty and the opposition to monarchists strike a familiar note, the details of the story, beginning with the popular designation, the title of liberty, are strangely archaic. You see, the thing is that what Bill showed is that the title of liberty is not strangely archaic. That fits right in with what George Washington said on 2 separate occasions, wasn't it, Bill?
That's correct, my friend.
Yeah. And there's your ball game.
Excellent. So I know that Professor Murphy's down there below. Before we go to him, really quick, folks, the call-in studio is open, 662-667-6667 or 662 Mormons. I will also take the link. If you want to come in studio and share your thoughts, you can do that as well. So that's going into the live chat right now as we speak. And then the second thing I'll say is please like and subscribe. Please, that helps us out with the YouTube algorithm that puts this episode in front of more people. If every one of you would just stop right this second, whether you're watching this live or whether you're watching this after it's been recorded, if you would just hit the like button and hit subscribe to the channel, you would help this get more exposure, hence more views, hence more people get to see these connections who maybe aren't even aware of them. And then lastly, before we go to Professor Murphy, I just want to say, folks, that our show survives on donations. We are a nonprofit 501c3. Your donations are tax exempt within the United States. Please consider going to mormonismlive.org, clicking the donate button, sending a few bucks, $5 a month, $10 a month. All of these folks who sort of plead for those kinds of things, they always point out it's less than a fancy cup of coffee, whatever that is. I don't care. Just $5 a month, $10 a month. Please help support the show. Help us continue to create content like this, and to make sure that Mormonism Live, Radio Free Mormon, and the other programs that we do on this channel, that they can go far into the future. All right. So, Professor Murphy, how are you, my friend? Good to see you.
I'm doing well. Thank you for including me in the show and for highlighting my work.
Absolutely, my friend. What did you? I'm gonna move me to the bottom so folks can see you. Oops, I think that somehow there we go. That's not what I wanted to do though. Let's try that. All right, Professor Murphy, what did you think of tonight's episode, and what do you want to add to the conversation?
Well, I think that's a better looking picture of me, but anyway, I think you made a very convincing argument that basically Captain Moroni is a type and shadow of George Washington. And of course, I was convinced of that the first time I read the Book of Mormon when I was 7 years old. So I'm an easy case. I mean, it seemed obvious to me at that time.
How did you know that much about George Washington when you were 7?
I went to elementary school.
Well, still.
Yeah, we talked. I mean, this was Idaho, right?
And a while back, I guess.
Yeah, we talked a lot about the revolution, and that was a big part of our education early on.
Wow.
And so it was obvious to me. I mean, so I had always made that association with my mind. When I started to see kind of a bigger picture wasn't until much later in my adulthood, and I was trying to understand my own family history. And I had grown up with these stories of a Iroquois ancestor in Western New York, and I started researching that family connections and started coming across people like Sir William Johnson that struck me like, wow, this sure reminds me a lot of Malachi in the Book of Mormon. And so it's like, maybe there's more than just a Captain Moroni, George Washington connection, something of an Malachi, Sir William Johnson. And as I dug in deeper, I started seeing not just were there these couple of characters, but a large number of the characters, and the stories that we're rehashing were based on, at least my reading, were based on actual historical characters that were fictionalized and exaggerated in many cases, and corrected from maybe Joseph Smith's wishful perspective in other cases. And so when you're talking, for example, about the differences, as Bushman was emphasizing, I do think the differences are important. And in fact, that's where you can see either Joseph Smith's misconception of what actually happened, or you might see his critique of what happened. So I do think there's value in looking at those differences too, and we're always dangerous if we only focus on the parallels. So I agree with Bushman on that, but you know, one thing that struck me when you're talking about the critiques of Bushman and judges is that actually in Western New York, in the aftermath of the revolution, judges did play a much bigger role than like mayors and city council. And I learned that from reading this book, Alan Taylor's William Cooperstown, Power and Persuasion on the Frontier of the Early American Republic. And so this is set in Western New York, and looking at the role of judges, or that's a big part of it, is the role of these judges, that one of which was William Cooper, and how they manipulated the local economies and politics. And that was, in fact, a commonly used term at the time, more so than it is today. So in that respect, the Book of Mormon is more reflective of that time and place.
Do you know if that has anything to do with why sometimes people would name their boys Judge?
They
had
good
judge,
question.
they had
Yeah,
doctor.
I don't know. Yeah. You know, a couple of other things that I was thinking about too is that as I read the Book of Mormon as an allegory, and it's a critique of Joseph Smith's own society. It's not what actually happened in ancient America. But Joseph Smith had a kind of a cyclical view of history. He saw, I think, history as repeating itself. And you see that logic coming out in the Book of Mormon in references to types and shadows, or likening scripture unto yourself. There is this idea of repetition, and that characters are types and shadows of others that have come in the past and that will come yet in the future.
By the way, Doctor,
Yeah.
just to make this hopefully clear to me, is that this is not an unusual or type of literature, that we have types like this, like in things that are as familiar as The Wizard of Oz,
Right.
which is a fictional account of social commentary about the way things should be. I think Gulliver's Travels has elements of that. So these are things that were very common kinds of writings.
Yeah, and you know, as Dan says, very much a critique of the 1820s, late 1820s, at the time it was written, of Jacksonian America. And I know Dan put in a lot of comments about how Jackson also is somewhat similar to the Captain Moroni, George Washington characters, and that was actually intentional on Andrew Jackson's part. He was mimicking and trying to look like George Washington to create that appeal, that popular appeal. So I think Dan's onto something there too, that these types and shadows are not always exclusive to a single character, and I think I see a fair amount of that in the Book of Mormon.
Very good. Was there anything else here that you were going to share with us, Doctor?
Well, I could go on and on, but I don't want to take too much time. I would say that I did present some of these ideas previously in that show, Neophytes and Lamanites, and those that would like to know a little bit more, I can go back to that. That was very early in the research that I was doing on my forthcoming book, but you can hear some of that, some more detail there. My book will be coming out from the University of Utah Press this fall, the fall of 2025, and it's entitled Unsettling Scripture, Iroquois and the Book of Mormon, and it examines representations of the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois peoples, including the Oneidas, in the Book of Mormon. The Haudenosaunee are the 6 nations of the Iroquois. That's the Mohawks, the Oneidas, the Onondagas, the Cayugas, and the Senecas. And the Book of Mormon came from Seneca territory. And the Senecas have a lot of their own stories about how Mormons came to be, to answer the Book of Mormon's claims about how American Indians came to be. And those stories are what I explore in the Book of Mormon. What do Haudenosaunee, Seneca, and others say about Mormons? And then how does that compare and contrast with the historical record? And a big part of that is that representation of Oneidas in the Book of Mormon. But there's also quite a few other stories, Iroquois stories that are recast in the Book of Mormon or alluded to in the Book of Mormon, much the way that the Bible is alluded to. So I identify a number of those and explore those possibilities.
When does this book come out again, and how can we get it?
It's going to be through the University of Utah Press, and it will come out this fall. It's not available for purchase yet, but I would like to come back on the show when it is, if that's all right, and
hawk your book. Absolutely, we'd love it.
Well, thank you, and great job, and I enjoy watching the show.
Yeah,
thanks so much.
Usually I don't get the live version. I'm usually a day or two late, but it's great to join you today.
and you're welcome back on. This is the #1 show for history, science, and theology. So
We're better than the #1 show for history, science, and theology, and that's saying something.
How many Brodies did they win?
Oh, no.
I'm just teasing.
Life is too short to be little, my friend.
That's right.
I think that's Kipling.
Yeah, Professor
Do you like
Murphy, thank
Kipling?
you so much.
Do you
What's
like
that?
Kipling?
Sure.
The answer is, I don't know. I've never kippled before.
Thank you, Professor Murphy.
Oh, I just saw that question about Tim Rathbone. If you want me to ask about the birch bark scrolls.
Oh yeah, you expecting those out any day, aren't you?
What's going
We'll
on?
see.
It sounds
We'll
like
see on that. But you know what's interesting? Those birch bark scrolls were known in the 18th and 19th century by missionaries, and they called them hieroglyphics, and likened them to Egyptian hieroglyphics.
You're talking about around Book of Mormon times, when the Book of Mormon came out?
Oh yeah. Birch bark scrolls were known from early contact time with the Mi'kmaq and other Algonquian nations, and they were being produced at the time.
By the way, Professor Murphy,
Hieroglyphics, huh?
Yeah, that's what the missionaries called them. Yeah,
wow.
Go ahead, Bill.
I don't have an issue with birch bark scrolls existing. What I fear is happening is the same thing that happened with Mark Hoffman, which is you take a pre-existing idea, something that people will go like, that's got a grain of truth to it, I'm going to sort of trust that. And then you claim what the thing is and you invent what the thing is going to be. So if some birch bark scrolls come out, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
When science figures out how to decipher what that is, let's see if it's authentic and it says what you say it does. That's
and those the birch bark scrolls. I mean, we don't have to see what Chief Mittagah comes out with specifically, but they are well known in the Midewiwin tradition out of which he comes. That has a strong connection to Masonry, and a big part of that the connection to Masonry, and this was part of that anti-Masonic rhetoric of the 1820s against Jackson, was this concern that there was Native American Masonry, and you see that in the Book of Mormon as well. The Midewiwin traditions come out of that same cultural ferment as the Book of Mormon, so there are going to be parallels for sure.
Apologists will have a hell of a time with it, won't they?
Oh, and they have.
Yeah,
they actually have. This is one of Chief Mittagah's big angles.
Mm-hmm.
Which is they've got Native American, you wouldn't say temples, but you would say whatever their holy place might be in different tribes, and
lodges.
Lodges, thank you. And he would say that he has gone in there and it's exactly the same as a temple. I'm expecting there's a little bit of exaggeration going on for effect there, but if there is some truth to it, even startling truth to it, it's not that the Lamanites have the remnants of the Mormon temple that was introduced in Book of Mormon times. Okay, it's because they got it from the Masons.
Well, and so the Masons got some of their stuff from Native Americans too. So it wasn't one way sharing. It was occurring in both directions.
there was so little on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and apologists got a good decade out of that. So this will be exciting to see.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing that Jonah Barnes is over there barking about the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were doing that in 78 when I joined the church, 79. It was a huge thing. And there was a lot of excitement about it. And I think a lot of the excitement was the anticipation, because there's a lot of political intrigue and being able to get the translations out, right?
Mhm.
And what are they hiding? You know, that whole thing. I think it was more political than it was anything else. And, you know, they had to get stuff out and get it done. But different people kept taking over as leader, I think. I can't remember the entire history. But they eventually got all produced. They're a big yawn. I'm sorry. As far as being for Mormon apologetic purposes, Dr. Murphy,
Mhm.
there's nothing.
Yeah, and you know that Joseph Brandt, who I think is like the Amaron character in Book of Mormon, was himself a famous Mason, and so you know there's a lot there of interest between that intersection between Mormonism, Masonry.
The only thing that's in the Dead Sea Scrolls that has any relation to Mormonism is having like a leadership group of 3. That was their huge. Remember that? That was their huge deal. They talked about that all the time. The funny thing is that actually doesn't have anything to do with the Book of Mormon.
There was one other thing, which was I think it was like a Catholic priest said something like, you know, it looks like these guys would be called the Church of the Last Days, but there's already a church in our day that has that name or something like that.
Some kind of quip that the Mormons took and ran with, right?
Yeah.
So what I was trying to say though about that part before was what was I talking about before, Bill? Before you so rudely interrupted me.
I thought I came in after you said your point, but it was
I want to say it 3 times, you know,
it was the other similarity in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
The three.
Oh, the 3. Because it has nothing to do with the Book of Mormon, because there's no group of 3 leaders in the Book of Mormon. This is
Nephites.
Well, yeah, but you know what I mean by leaders, right?
Yeah.
That's the structure of the church.
Right.
It's not in the Book of Mormon where you got a guy, a president, and counselors.
Mm-hmm.
That's in the Mormonism. So I don't know why it's that big a deal, is what I'm trying to say. But I thought it was great at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I remember hearing this guy talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. We'll have to do a show on it once, Bill, at some time. But I remember crying about all of those scrolls that got burned for fuel to keep those Bedouins warm, when they could have been used to prove the Book of Mormon true. I knew the goods, the real goods were in those scrolls that were getting burned up.
Zenos and Zenoch were in there. Zenos and Zenoch were in the scrolls that got burned.
And Aeneas and Sheum.
Yeah. They did not make it to the
turn, Tom.
They did not.
Well, you know,
there
were a lot of native writings that were destroyed as well. The wampum of the Iroquois, a lot of those were destroyed and broken up and sold for by collectors, and of course the Maya codices that were destroyed by the Spanish. So you know, I ache for that loss.
Oh, by the way, yeah, and absolutely, there's a lot of lost manuscripts.
Yeah,
to go around and writings, right? And but what I wanted to say was, I'm sorry, I'm having a tough time remembering what I'm trying to say tonight. But anyway, I can't remember. It'll come to me later.
Professor Murphy, thank you for joining us. Anything else from you? Otherwise, we'll kindly let you go and let you get back to your family. And appreciate your time.
Those who would like to see that conference presentation that I gave at the Conference on Iroquois Research, that is available on my academia page. So feel free to check that out.
And that link is in the show notes as well, I believe.
Oh, excellent. So thank you, and look forward to other callers.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right.
Great to have heavy hitters like Dr. Murphy come on the show and help us out in preparation as well.
Yeah. Dan Vogel in the comments putting things out. We really appreciate the fact that on some level that you guys are informed and entertained and see this as a place where scholarly conversation happens. So
here's what I was going to say. Thank you. The reason I say that about the Dead Sea Scrolls, and just to say I'm not spouting off, I've read the damn things in the original Hebrew. No, it was a translation. I think it was by Martinez. Was that the name? Famous one. It might have been Garcia, but regardless, I read all of the non-biblical books because they had all the biblical books in the Dead Sea Scrolls as well, but there were several books that they had that were exclusive to them. Okay, the Manual of Discipline. There was a Temple Scroll, several scrolls. I read through all of those. This is in 2005, 2006 when I'm doing my whole beat down and trying to find all the connections. It was a big bunch of nothing. And that's why you don't hear it talked about much anymore.
Same, by the way. Same, by the way, RFM. When that whole craze hit, I had joined the church in 96, and it was right about shortly thereafter, within the late 90s, where sort of that had just become the craze. And as I bought several books, I went to firesides where somebody came in who was an expert and told the entire crowd in the chapel how amazing these connections were. And then I go and I get the books and I read the stuff and I go, there's nothing here. There's nothing here. There's nothing here that they told me was going to be here. And I set it aside and moved on to bigger and better things because it was nothing.
There's a battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. What are you talking about? That's the war in heaven. Oh, you mean the war in heaven that's talked about in, the New Testament? I think it's in one of the Gospels and in the Book of Revelation as well. Anyway, yeah, it's kind of common.
Yeah.
So, who's this? Who is this? Who darkening our doorway?
Nathan, how are you?
Hello, gents. Thanks for letting me in the studio.
You're welcome.
I'll be quick.
In Tennessee?
Yeah, I'll be quick. I actually wanted to talk about that. So I'm in Tennessee, the volunteer state, the Vols, and in the late war, there's a lot of things mentioned, and I feel like I am more affected by the late war similarities to the Book of Mormon than I hear a lot of other people. And I also feel like I've heard some people almost discount it. So I was going to ask when I finish if you guys can just give me a couple sentences on if the late war is problematic for you personally. But regarding Tennessee, there's a part in there where it talks about the 2,000 stripling warriors, and we all know the references in the Book of Mormon, and in the late war, it talks about how there were 2,000 hardy men, and they fought with dauntless courage, which is the same terminology from the Book of Mormon. They fought with some kind of courage, and there's multiple references about these 2,000 hardy men, and of course we know those turned out to be the volunteers from the Tennessee state of the War of 1812.
The stripling warriors?
Yeah, so the stripling warriors are the Tennessee Vols.
Well, we could have used them at the Alamo. That's all I'm saying.
So there's so many references. I literally put in the chat earlier, when I was scrolling through that, it just ripped my testimony to shreds. Just seeing just so many. You can scroll all day long to see so many similarities in the way that they describe things. And I'm just mentioning one with the 2,000 stripling warriors and the 2,000 dauntless, whatever it was, warriors. So anyway,
wait a second, Bishop.
Yes,
Are you
sir.
telling me that the number is exactly the same?
Yes, 2,000. 2,000. I'll send you if you type in, Bill, if you type in the late war comparison with the Book of Mormon, it's like one of the first things that pulls up, and there's a huge comparison, and you can sit there and scroll it. Oh, you can scroll it and see so many. And I think, RFM, I think you've done a episode on that. Have you not?
No. I think we did something where we touched upon it among other things, and Bill was the one doing the touching.
No, it says
2,000. Yeah, no, I've got it. I see it right here. So give me a second to put it up on the screen.
Yeah, I was trying to text it to you. but
Yeah.
While
yeah,
you're doing
there's
that, Bill, I just want to say that I found the Dead Sea Scrolls that I read. I thought it might be Martinez and I thought it might be Garcia. And I find it's actually Florentino Garcia Martinez. Yes.
Let me say two things. So one is the late war. This is the book. And all I would say to anybody who, almost everyone watching this show is familiar with this.
right.
But if you just change the proper nouns, the proper words of the text, you essentially have the Book of Mormon. Listen to this. Now it came to pass in the 1812th year of the Christian era, and in the 30th and 6th year, I want to say the reign of judges, right? But in the people of the provinces of Columbia, but declared themselves free and an independent nation, that in the 6th month of the same year, on the first day of the month, the chief governor, whom the people had chosen to rule over the land of Columbia. It's Book of Mormon language, and you can go page after page after page, and you get this same sort of idea. And it came to pass.
It is like it's like the author of the Book of Mormon. It's like the same person wrote them both. Okay,
Yes.
so here's the thing. It's like the person who wrote the Book of Mormon
Yeah,
read this book.
that
It's
Bill.
like they read this book. Because what you do is you start getting imbued with the styles and the patterns and the language choices of what it is you're reading. I can't tell you how many times that's happened to me. It happens with music, happens with lots of things. And we start to take on those characteristics, and then we start to express ourselves in the same kinds of characteristics. So that's what it looks like to me. I'm not saying it can be proven, but it looks like Joseph Smith really read and enjoyed this book or a book similar to it prior to writing the Book of Mormon.
It's worse, Nathan. So
I
here,
I was just reading that during the show. It's crazy.
RFM, look at this. So immediately Jackson took 2,000 hardy men who were called volunteers because they fought freely for their country. And then just a short few chapters later, about this time, a stripling from the South, a small band of Columbia fought desperately and the slaughter was dreadful. Anyway, 2,000 is definitely the band.
Yeah.
A band of more than 2,000 chosen men, a band of 2,000 hardy men. And
can I tell you how I measure these?
Yeah.
Bishop, here's how I measure these parallels. I think, yeah, that's pretty striking. But what I can tell you is I can guarantee you that if the late war were an ancient document that got discovered after Joseph Smith, okay, this would be heralded as an incredible proof of the Book of Mormon.
Way bigger than Nahum, way bigger than NHM.
2,000 times
an ancient text. Yes.
Yes. And so when I think of it that way, and I'm not being unfair, I've been an apologist many, many years. So if that's the way they would treat that, then I think that fairness dictates to be treated as strong, regardless of what side of the equation it falls on, except for the fact, by the way, that I've already committed myself to the proposition that all of these similarities between ancient texts in the Book of Mormon and modern texts in the Book of Mormon are all probably mostly coincidental anyway.
Yeah. In this document that Bill was on, there's also the Kingman and Freeman thing in there. And there's also this whole a ball of curious workmanship. Same terminology in both books. It's just, when I was reading that, literally, I was floored. I was in tears. I'll go to my mom's house and I'm like, you've got to see this. And she's like, well, maybe Hunt or whatever his name was inspired by the devil. And I'm like, I don't know, Mom, but I cannot deal with that. So anyways, I just feel like I get tore up about it much more than some people. But anyways, it's this what Bill's scrolling is. That is what tore my testimony to shreds.
That sounds very traumatic. No, I mean it does.
I would have a hunch. Again, if I were just a guessing man, I don't know, and maybe my guesses are not good, but I would guess there's a greater than 50% chance that Joseph Smith read the late war. Not that he plagiarized from it directly, not that it is the Book of Mormon, rather that there's a lot of things that if he had remembered 5% of the book, he had remembered 3% of the book. And whatever you want to say about Joseph Smith, he seems to have some sort of good memory, because every time Terrell Gibbons, again, that episode, we're showing that Joseph Smith is borrowing from so many sources. Some of those he maybe secretly used during the translation, like Adam Clark's commentary. But at least some of this would just be stuff that's ruminating in his head. And there just seems to be such a overlap in the language of this. And then the first book of Napoleon is another one that has a significant amount of language overlap, not subject matter, the way in which sentences are formed. It's strange that Nephites and Lamanites from the Jewish culture writing in Reformed Egyptian write the exact same way that the books of Joseph Smith's day would write things. That's strange. So anyway, thank you, Nathan.
Well, go Vols.
Yeah, thank you, my friend.
Born on a mountaintop in Tennessee, my friend.
All 2,000 of them.
Take care.
Take it easy.
Bye.
All right. And then our last thing for the night will be a phone call. I just need to.
Sure. I hope I'm not the only one who gets that reference. Born on a mountaintop in Tennessee. Bill?
Davy Crockett?
Thank God.
I don't know.
It was going to be the passing of a generation. If you didn't know what that was, but you carry it on, my friend.
There we go. Okay. So now Nathan Detroit, who's a regular on our Mormonism After Dark show, which will be Friday at 8 p.m., folks. A little bit lighter side, a little more fun and laughs. Nathan, are you there, my friend? Hello, hello. I don't hear you, so give me a second, and I'm going to try.
Nathan Detroit, with a name from one of the main characters in that famous, fun Broadway musical, Guys and Dolls.
All right, I need to figure out how here we go. Let's see here. Get rid of that.
Call a lawyer and sue me, sue me. What can you do me?
I'm going to keep trying, Nathan. Are you there? What am I doing wrong?
I don't know, but that was like the only Nathan Detroit song in the whole show.
All right, let's try. There. Oh, I thought I heard you. Nathan, you're there.
Yeah.
Gotcha, my friend. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, great to join you, gentlemen. Thank you for this great topic tonight. It's been very eye-opening.
Yeah, I was a little surprised. Other people have gone into this. This isn't the first time this subject's been covered. It's the first time that I was aware of the significant overlap in this area. I knew of a few of the things, but some of this was brand new to me. And so I don't claim to be the first one to this, but I think this might be the first time it's explained in like a long form video podcast. So to me, it was mind blowing as well, Nathan.
Yeah, it reminded me something that we discussed when Brent Metcalf was on and discussing his Mosaic priority a few weeks ago about I think this goes to the idea that Joseph Smith's original intent with the Book of Mormon was to sell a Christian adventure story and make some money.
Yeah. Trouble is it needed to be a good book. And as Mark Twain pointed out, it was chloroform in print. So he had to move on to using the book for a different purpose.
Yeah, well, yeah, I won't speak to whether it was successful in being an exciting adventure story, but what I was thinking of was, this part with introducing Captain Moroni comes in the Book of Alma, which again, Mosaic priority is relatively early in the at least what we have currently. And your points about equating Captain Moroni with George Washington reminded me of something that's described in another book that I enjoy. It's called The Founding Myth. And one of the things that he discusses is an Episcopal preacher named Mason Locke Weems, who published a book.
Oh, Pastor Weems? Pastor Weems?
Yes.
In the cherry tree story?
Yes, the cherry tree story, and he also yes, you're getting exactly where I'm going. RFM is he published a story of George Washington, or a quote unquote biography that included the cherry tree story, and also is the source of the George Washington praying in Valley Forge story that we now see on so many LDS walls from Arnold Freiberg.
Yes, I had that. I absolutely had that, and got it framed and put it up on the wall of my office at the prosecutor's office 35 years ago when I started there. By the way, I've got to say something. Somebody has said that the character of Nathan Detroit in the movie couldn't sing, and just letting you know, if we're talking about the 55 MGM musical, that was Frank Sinatra who played the part. So
yes,
could sing. Yeah. Maybe they're talking about a different version that I don't know.
Thank you, Nathan.
Now, Sky Masterson, on the other hand, was played by. Oh, see ya, Nathan. Bye. Sky Masterson was now into something important. Sky Masterson was played by Marlon Brando, who was not a trained singer, but managed to carry a tune just fine.
I was just looking up. So,
oh, wait. What the hell is this? Jay Crook is trying to troll me.
Oh, man.
Forget about it. I'm not being trolled tonight. They write Frank Sinatra is a bad singer. Yeah. Let the crows descend.
Yeah, the Beatles were a bad band. RFM, Martin Harris mortgaged his farm. If I'm not mistaken, if I remember right, it was $3,000 to print 5,000 copies.
Yeah, right? It was one or the other, but I think that's it.
Yeah, so which would make, I think it's that one, because I think it put the price of the Book of Mormon just the cost, at under $1 a copy. It was 60 cents a copy, $3,000 for 5,000 copies. So to break even, Joseph Smith would have to sell every copy of that book for at least 60 cents, right? $1 in 1830 was worth $34 in today's buying power. The cost of that book was over $20 in today's money. So imagine going out trying to sell the Book of Mormon, and your cost in the book is $20 a book.
Right.
So you got to sell it for $30, 35, but whatever it is to make money. And nobody would buy it. To this day, no one will buy it. From 1830 until today, the way the church has survived is by giving the book out for free and then pressuring people into a spiritual experience.
We tried to sell it for 100 in.
Didn't work.
Well, we sold a few. Mostly from people who joined the church.
Yeah. But not enough.
I'm not sure what we did with that money. Did we go get ice cream or something? No, I think what did we do with that? It's been so long. We must have had to have collected and sent it somewhere to cover the costs of that Book of Mormon in Japanese. How do you say Book of Mormon in Japanese?
How did you know? I don't know.
Mormon K.
Mormon
K. It's like special K.
The church bragging about the Book of Mormon is like the Gideon Society bragging about how many Bibles have been placed. You know, you're the one in control of handing them out for free, and you still have a hard time getting them into people's hands.
Yeah, well, the idea was if you make them pay something for it, then they're going to value it more than if you just gave it to them for free.
Yeah.
It's what every con artist since the beginning of time, I'm sure, has said.
Yeah.
It occurs to me now.
Yeah.
That's probably the case.
So anyway, that's the end of the calls. We had 2 in studio with Professor Murphy and Nathan Hinckley, and then Nathan Detroit on the phone. Folks, I just want to say one more time, like and subscribe. Please share this episode in places. Put it on Ex-Mormon Reddit. Go into Mormon Dialogue and Discussion Board. Go on to the Discuss Mormonism board. Put this episode out. Get folks a chance to know it's out there. Help them be aware. Like and subscribe. Please tune in Friday for Mormonism After Dark, 8 p.m. Mountain Time here on this channel. Anything else from URFM before we call it a night?
No, but I'm just loving all the comments from Frank Sinatra lovers. Not digging the comments from the Frank Sinatra haters, but that's okay, because you know something? That's what makes this country America, is you can have your own opinion, no matter how wrong and backward and slack-jawed it might be.
Yeah. And you can believe you have the #1 show in science, history, and theology if you want to. RFM, have a great night, and I'll see you Friday.
Very good. See you later.